2 months ago, one of the largest military parades in world history went down in Beijing. And I have to be honest, this event put the entire world on notice. Not because China is planning on starting a war or attacking anyone. No, there was a lot more going on behind the scenes in Beijing, as this parade featured tens of thousands of troops, cutting edge weaponry, and the first full public display of China's land, sea, air, nuclear triad. Now, while some political commentators in the West claim the purpose of this parade is to threaten the United States or signal an imminent invasion of Taiwan, that couldn't be further from the truth. The true purpose was far more strategic. You see, Chinese leaders are known for thinking many steps ahead. And this parade was designed to send a clear message. The United States needs to abandon its escalation with China. And guess what? The US government has already listened. Last week, a draft of the newest national defense strategy revealed a shocking shift. The US military is now prioritizing domestic and regional missions over countering major adversaries like China and Russia. Wow, that's interesting. A complete turnaround from the pivot to Asia strategy that started under the Obama administration over a decade ago. You see, for years, we've been told in Western media that China is the biggest threat to the future of our world. But in reality, China remains the top trading partner for over 120 countries. China is securing more trade deals than the US under Trump's wild trade war. And China is positioning itself as a country of stability in a world of chaos. Quite honestly, this is an admission by the Pentagon that the United States cannot win a conventional war with China. Now, I know that's a bold claim, but it's not based on what we saw during Beijing's military parade. It's backed by numerous reports from the Pentagon itself. And in today's video, we're going to cut through the noise, break down what this parade truly signifies, show why the U.S. is retreating from Asia, and explain why China's military has the upper hand. Everyone, let's dive in. You see, the main issue with Beijing's military parade is that Western media can't understand the meaning behind it. They want to flash videos of world leaders walking together in Beijing and spin it as a story that they are conspiring together to destroy the West. But the truth is, this parade carries a much deeper meaning than this narrative. You see, the title of this parade was "The Commemoration of the 80th Anniversary of the Victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance Against Japanese Aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War." This marked China's victory in World War II over Japan, who launched an unprovoked invasion of the country. China paid an unfathomable price, with tens of millions of lives lost in the battle against Imperial Japan. But in the United States, China's massive contribution to the war is often either ignored or downplayed. You see, the war in China started in 1937. 4 years before the U.S. entered in 1941, and much of that fighting took place on Chinese soil. To the Chinese, this is painfully obvious. It's still within living memory for many, with entire families having been affected. Many Chinese have grandparents who either fought or were killed in the war. While this is well understood in China, it's largely forgotten or buried in the West, largely because of Japan's role as a key U.S. ally during the Cold War. This altering of history has even reached the highest levels of Western political discourse. A glaring example is a recent statement by Kaja Kallas, Vice President of the European Commission. Her remarks perfectly illustrate how anti-Russian and anti-Chinese rhetoric has distorted the Western understanding of history. Russia was addressing China like you, and like Russia and China, we, fought the Second World War. We won the Second World War. We won the Nazism. And I was like, okay, that is something new. But then, if you know history, then it raises a lot of question marks in your head. But, I can tell you nowadays, people don't really read and remember history that much, which is that, you can see that they buy these narratives. The irony in her lament that people don't remember history is staggering. As Europe's top diplomat, and a key architect of EU foreign policy, she fails to acknowledge a fundamental historical fact. It was the Soviet Union, not the US or Britain, that did the overwhelming majority of the work in defeating Nazi Germany, accounting for 75 to 80% of the Nazis' military destruction. Of course, this inconvenient truth doesn't fit the EU's current anti-Russian narrative. And while the bitterness over China's victory is widespread in Europe, it didn't stop there. In the US, Donald Trump also couldn't resist taking a jab. He tweeted, "The big question to be answered is whether President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and blood the United States of America gave to the Chinese to secure its freedom from a very unfriendly foreign invader." Trump ended his tweet with a petty, bitter remark. "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America." Now, as a U.S. citizen, I'm incredibly proud of my country's role in World War II. But it's deeply frustrating and disappointing to see this history twisted for modern-day political purposes. What could have been a moment for cooperation between the U.S. and China has instead been weaponized for a cheap political jab, one that is completely insulting, given that China was the one invaded and shed far more blood than anyone else in defeating Japan. Trump's tweet is an attempt to claim the lion's share of credit for the war, even though China lost 20 million people, with some estimates placing the number at 35 million. The Soviet Union sacrificed around 27 million lives, while the United States lost a comparative 400,000 soldiers. This is why knowing history is so crucial. The facts don't lie, and they undermine the political rewrites that are being pushed today to serve contemporary agendas. Not only has Western media misunderstood the historical context behind the parade, but they have also completely misinterpreted its purpose as a deterrent. Once again, the narrative being pushed by Western media is that this parade was an aggressive display aimed directly at the United States. But what the U.S. media refuses to acknowledge is that the very reason for China's military advancements in weapons and technology is largely a product of U.S. actions. You see, the U.S. has been aggressively surrounding China with an openly stated policy of containment. America has even gone so far as to sail warships through the Taiwan Strait. Yet the media continues to spin the narrative that China is the aggressor. But China's military focus has always been rooted in self-defense, never extending beyond its own sphere of influence. Chinese military philosophy is guided by an ancient principle: to subdue the enemy without fighting. This idea is central to Sun Tzu's Art of War. Ironically, this text is also a key part of the curriculum at America's own prestigious West Point Military Academy. However, when U.S. military officers study Sun Tzu, they obsess over strategies to win wars, often overlooking his deeper wisdom about avoiding them altogether. So while Western mainstream media spins the parade as a threat, the reality is quite the opposite. It was a display of strength that guarantees peace, sending the clear message: don't even try it. This is not a war you want to start. U.S. strategists have known for years that a conflict with China would be disastrous for America. In every single Pentagon war game scenario, the United States is decisively defeated. In these simulations, America's missile stockpiles are exhausted in days. Thousands of U.S. servicemen are lost, and entire fleets of aircraft carriers and ships are wiped out, all without achieving any meaningful U.S. objectives. This should be common sense. The U.S. is thousands of miles away from China, while China would never fight a war outside its own territory. But despite this, numerous anti-China think tanks and war hawks, heavily incentivized by military-industrial interests, have pushed the idea of a realistic conventional war with China. But after seeing the scale of China's military advancements displayed in parades like this one, even the most ardent war hawks in Washington have been forced to confront the harsh reality. A war with China is not just unwise, it's virtually unwinnable. The evidence of a clear U.S. defeat is simply too overwhelming to ignore. And as a result, the focus has shifted back to America's immediate sphere of influence, away from the fantasy of escalating a conflict with China. The military parade in China showcased a significant technological gap between China and the United States. You see, the main tools of the U.S. military today are power projection through its fleet of 11 aircraft carriers and a relatively limited number of high-tech missiles and weapons. While these assets may be incredibly effective against much weaker militaries, such as Iraq, they are simply not suited to contend with a 21st century great power. The war in Ukraine has already demonstrated the realities of the modern battlefield, one that will be fought primarily through drones, electronic warfare, and advanced missile systems. These technologies are shifting the balance of power, with quantity overtaking quality. The advantage is going to countries that can mass produce low-cost drones and missiles rather than those who focus on building the most expensive, state-of-the-art technologies. The U.S. is lacking in two key aspects of modern warfare: the right type of weapons and the ability to produce them in large quantities. The U.S. may have the best aircraft carriers, tanks, and helicopters in the world, but they are essentially useless in a conflict with China. Hypersonic missiles launched in mass would easily sink an aircraft carrier before it even gets close to China's shores. The most advanced tanks are powerless when overwhelmed by a swarm of explosive suicide drones. This shift in technology was clearly demonstrated during the parade, where 80% of displayed equipment was shown for the first time in public. The People's Liberation Army displayed a wide variety of hypersonic missiles, from anti-ship missiles to long-range ballistic missiles. Also on display were a range of unmanned drones, including variants that were completely unknown in the West. In addition to offensive drones, China showcased advancements in defense technologies, which are also well ahead of Western capabilities. The parade featured a number of jamming, anti-drone, and missile interception systems, including ship-mounted laser interceptors and portable microwave systems designed to protect against large swarms of drones. These state-of-the-art technologies are ready for deployment, while in the West, they are still largely on the drawing board. Technologies like UAVs, unmanned underwater vehicles, and robotic ground platforms are areas where China isn't just catching up with the West, they're leading the way, creating a generational gap. This directly challenges the idea that China steals all of their technology. After all, how can the Chinese steal technology that the United States hasn't even invented yet? But beyond advanced technology, China also has the ability to mass produce these weapons in far greater numbers than the United States. With the world's largest manufacturing capacity, China accounts for 35% of global gross production, more than the next 9 largest manufacturers combined. In the event of a war, this industrial capacity can be redirected to the war effort, much like the United States did during World War II, when it was the undisputed manufacturing superpower of the world. But that manufacturing capacity has long been shipped overseas. And today, the U.S. lacks the capability to sustain a prolonged conflict with China. Not to mention, the primary theater of any war between the two nations would be naval, as the world's largest ocean separates the two powers. That's why a powerful Navy is absolutely critical. The numbers make it clear: the U.S. is outmatched. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, China's shipbuilding capacity is 232 times greater than that of the United States. While U.S. shipyards can produce 3 to 4 ships per year, China can produce 8 to 9 ships per month. There is simply no competition in terms of naval capabilities. As the mountain of evidence against the feasibility of war with China continues to grow, it's no surprise that the United States has shifted its focus back to its own backyard. This move mirrors its recent policy of backing out of Ukraine, essentially dumping the burden of that war onto Europe. Instead, Trump's administration has revived the centuries-old Monroe Doctrine, asserting that all of North, Central, and South America is the United States' domain. The U.S. has abandoned any pretense of adhering to a rules-based order or upholding human rights. Instead, it has fully embraced a 19th century mindset of imperialism, plundering other nations for resources and influence. Early on in the administration, there were threats to annex Greenland for its rare earth minerals and to take control over the Panama Canal. The Trump cabinet even deployed plans for military strikes into Mexico to target drug cartels, despite explicit objections from Mexico to foreign intervention in its internal affairs. Most recently, the U.S. has focused its attention on Venezuela, openly pursuing regime change and forced access to the country's vast oil reserves. The United States has mobilized at least 8 warships and thousands of Marines to Puerto Rico and off the coast of Venezuela, essentially begging for an excuse to invade. U.S. forces have already carried out a deadly military strike on an alleged drug boat linked to the trendy Agarrua cartel, killing 11 people. Now, normally the boat would have been seized or boarded by Border Patrol, and if drugs were found, the crew would face criminal charges. But now the U.S. has become the judge, jury, and executioner, using its military to kill citizens of a foreign country without providing any proof of a crime. This is the current state of U.S. foreign policy: open warmongering and a complete collapse of moral authority. And while we can all let out a sigh of relief that the threat of an all-out war with China seems to have receded, we're now confronted with increased militarization in the United States' own backyard and increasingly directed at its own citizens. In a flagrant violation of American values and the Constitution, thousands of U.S. soldiers have been deployed in both Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., and this trend is only set to continue. China's military parade was undoubtedly a success in achieving its strategic goals. However, the unfortunate reality is that the U.S. has redirected its military focus inward, increasingly targeting its neighbors and even its own citizens. As long as the military-industrial complex maintains its grip on U.S. foreign policy promoting endless conflict and war, the country will never see a government focused on peace and development. This parade marks a fundamental shift in the global balance of power. With China's growing technological superiority and manufacturing capacity, it has become the dominant force in the world, posing a deterrent that Washington simply cannot overcome. While nuclear war leaves no winners, it's clear that conventional warfare is defined by technological supremacy, and the U.S. is simply unable to compete on that front. Everyone, thank you for making it to this point of the video, and I hope you enjoyed today's deep dive into China's military. Knowledge is power, and it's critical to understand the facts of the situation instead of blindly listening to the media for your insights into China. Once again, this military parade was a display of deterrence, and hopefully it's a deterrence that sees the United States and China never going into a full-scale war. Because if that happens, it would be a total loss for all of humanity. Everyone, I want to thank you for making it to this point of the video, and thank you all for your incredible support. I look forward to seeing you all in our next video.